Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through 3 of the top stories. 2 talking about the pardon, the different perspectives on it from left, right, and indifferent, not indifferent, and then 1 talking about the possible new appointee, or at least nomination, for the Department of Defense. This episode will be a little bit shorter. We'll be running about 20 minutes because the first 2 stories can be really kind of synthesized, and the opinion on the pardon doesn't have to be that long because, as you'll find out, I have a very succinct opinion on it. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. Was it right or wrong? Was the pardon from Joe Biden to Hunter right or wrong? I'm sure this will fall along your line of political priors, so put them down there. Love to hear what everybody has to say. Now, since we are moving a little bit faster, we're going to jump straight into the first article that is called Biden Finally Does Something People Will Like. That comes from the Daily Beast. And obviously, this is an article that comes from more of a left-wing outlet, and they have a perspective which is whether or not they think that the pardon power should be used in the way that it was, they can understand and empathize with the reasoning that Joe Biden used in order to do it. Now, will they 100% agree that it is they were political prosecutions, that Hunter Biden was only targeted because he has a Biden in the end of his name? Maybe the jury will stay out on that one. But they can at least empathize with a father who's trying to protect their child, their son, and their only surviving son as well, and one of his only family members who's still around all the time with him. You know, we don't see many photos, at least, of him and his brothers anymore. I'm sure they're around. I'm not trying to say they're not, but Hunter's around a lot of the time, so is Jill. And you see some photos of his daughter every once in a while. The point being that Hunter is around, he's a stable part of his life, and he's getting into his older years. You know, you're going to get a strong empathy argument there. You're going to have things that really appeal to the pathos when you're making arguments, and they'll be effective. Now, why does this not matter? I said it was very succinct, or why do I not really care about this? Because it doesn't matter. Now, why doesn't it matter? There were many schools of thought, but I'm pretty sure every single American, if they were paying any close amount of attention to what was going on, knew that this pardon was coming the second that Joe Biden lost that election. I think the theory went, and this is how I saw it, and I'm pretty sure everybody else saw it this way, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're not political actors who see through what the politician is just saying out there. But if Joe Biden was going to win another term, he was going to allow the prosecutions to go through and then commute Hunter's sentence, and then probably, and this is speculation, but would have commuted his sentence and then given him a pardon on other things that could be brought up, because he would have had another 4 years. He could have let it play out. He could have said, "Hey, the Justice Department is doing their job. I'm not interfering as president," and Hunter would have served a few years, but it wouldn't have been the end of the world. And then he can say, "Justice was served out, and I'm going to pardon my son." But the second he lost that election, we knew this was coming. Come on. He cannot, period, full stop. He will not have his son be going to jail over these sort of prosecutions. The DOJ brought these because there was pressure from conservatives and Republicans in order to go after Hunter Biden. Does that mean that they were political prosecutions? No, they were the unearthing of information about a critical player, if not an important player, or an important person in the Biden circle, especially after the laptop was leaked. And they weren't necessarily, the people pressuring it, weren't necessarily saying, "Hey, you're prosecuting Donald Trump, so we have to prosecute Hunter Biden." That is what Hunter and Joe would want you to believe. But the idea was this evidence is out in the open, and you cannot carry out justice on one side when there is clear evidence that something is happening on the other. They had a pretty good point, which is the DOJ is politicized if it only goes after Republicans, and especially if it doesn't go after the leading member's son of the Democratic Party. I think that's a pretty fair analysis, and especially when he's actually committed crimes. I'm not saying that everything was peachy clean over there in the Biden camp and there wasn't anything. No, there were indeed crimes that were prosecutable. And there are questions about more crimes that are prosecutable, and that's why the pardon is interesting, because it's not just a pardon of his current sentences or his current how should I put it? Anything that he is currently being prosecuted on, but it is a blanket pardon for all activities. Now, that's the thing that really raises some questions, and I'm sure we'll get into that as we go into the second article because it comes from a more conservative outlet. But let me actually read from the first article what the opinion of this author is. Quote, pardoning his son, Joe Biden has asked Americans to understand why a father and a president would come to such a decision. Biden has made himself an easy target by allowing self-interest to taint his final days in the White House and offering his political enemies a free hit after the party he has given his life to has taken such a beating. So, I mean, that's honestly pretty scathing. For somebody who says, I want people to understand why they need to empathize with Joe, or at least why it makes sense to empathize with Joe. But to say that, which is he has still tainted the office, that's pretty strong commentary. Now, once again, do I think it matters? When it comes to standards, and when it comes to making sure that integrity is something that people care about, no, this is not a good thing by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously not. Do we want to continue to change the rules? Do you want it to become a norm that any president can vie for the office? They can go through the primary process, they can make it into the general, and they can just pardon their relatives for crimes? No, because you apparently nowadays, if somebody gets prosecuted, that's not enough to get him off the ticket. And whether or not, and let's be clear, whether or not you think Trump was rightly or wrongly prosecuted, and there were lots of different cases, but the point being that he was prosecuted and he was found guilty in civil trials, and he was found guilty. And my point is that I'm not going to go rehash that entire 6, 7, 8 months. The point being, he still won. He was able to overcome all the baloney that was thrown his way from all these various different prosecutors from New York to Georgia to Florida to D.C., and he was able to get into the White House. So even this argument that, Billy Bob Joe, the next presidential candidate, 48, he has all these family members who have been prosecuted, and if he follows in Biden's footsteps, he very well could pardon them. That argument may not even work on the American people anymore, because they may not care. If a person like Donald Trump, who has prosecutions on his record, he has convictions on his record, was able to get into the office, that actual argument for integrity may no longer resonate with the American people. It may not be a viable strategy to stop someone. So, yes, we don't want the norms to be eroded and therefore allow this sort of thing to happen in the future. But what I come down to is we knew it was going to happen. We had time to brace for it. And I don't think the shock over it is necessary. That's why I'm a day and a half late to this, because I wanted to let it play out a little bit. And it took up a day and a half-ish of news cycles, and then we move straight on from it. Because yes, the American people can understand the rationale of a father who has defended Hunter vociferously. And the American people who are on the other side of the aisle understand that that was probably going to happen from the second that Joe Biden wasn't going to have another 4 years. And if you want to be really skeptical and you want to be really paranoid, some people are saying, well, he couldn't have him out there on the lam. That's why the pardon was so... it stretched so far into the past. It wasn't just the current activities or anything he was under prosecution for now. I think there's actually a good argument there, even if I do believe it's a little bit paranoid to just think that's the only reason, or at least that's the major reason. I think a father who is, and let's be clear, I'm not saying he's the most empathetic, loving person in the world. He is a political machine who calculates just like anybody else. But also, how long does Joe Biden actually have? I'm not trying to be cruel. I don't want to harp on a man while he is down, because he is losing the presidency. He's had a long career and he has served his country. Whether or not you like his politics, he has served his country. It's basically the only thing he has done, which is served his country in the form of a member of the Senate, and vice president and president, obviously. The point being, he is a man who will not be around that much longer. And do you want to spend the last years of your life looking at your son through a piece of plexiglass? Do you want to visit your son in a jail? Do you want that to be the final years of your life with your son? No. So even if you are being completely cynical and saying that he has no emotional appeal there, or he doesn't actually care about the emotional side of things or the weight that it would take or affect him, the way that it would affect him when he has to deal with that with his son in jail, you could say, well, at least it's a brilliant political move to weaponize the empathy and be able to do that. So, hey, come on, guys, we saw this one coming, right? Am I crazy? Cool. I think we've trounced on this one enough. Now let's actually jump into a perspective from Real Clear Politics. Why Hunter's pardon doesn't outrage me. So this is still someone who doesn't necessarily like the eroding of norms, but has a more nuanced perspective on it. Quote, if anyone in America is still wondering why the election turned out the way it did, the Biden's pardon of his son should put their consternation of the rest to rest once and for all. The drip, drip, drip nature of revelations about the first son's shady dealings and the establishment's furious insistence that any repetition of these was tantamount to sedition steadily eroded the value of what the outgoing president called my word as a Biden, end quote. That's the line that I absolutely love here. There are lots of good lines from this article. But it is true. Joe Biden has repeatedly throughout his career lied. He has repeatedly throughout his career shifted or tried to dip, dive, dodge away from certain comments and try to evade hot topics. And he's done the standard politician move, which is to deny, to say that it's never happened this way, that I won't do this, and then turn around and do the opposite. Just like Obama when he was talking about traditional marriage in 2008, and then the switch around by the time he's going into 2012. You feel the winds and you go with it. And it probably sounded very popular and really in line with his message that I'm the honorable upholder of the establishment, of the institutions, in order to say I'm not even going to pardon my son. But he is a political animal who realized that there's a necessity here, either to protect himself or to get his son out of these sticky situations and stop the prosecutions that could keep him in jail or could even affect the livelihood of his grandchildren, whatever the rationale on the empathetic side may be. So he is a pure political wheeler and dealer. And if it shocks you, if it gets you a little bit in a tizzy, just understand that one, this will not be the last. And two, not even really the first. I mean, like Nixon had a pretty unambiguous pardon that I don't know if he necessarily should have gotten away with, though I understand Ford was trying to say that, well, you know, as a president who is brought in after the stepping down of the impeachment, well, what we need to do is actually unify here. I understand his reasoning, but that's another example of a very sweeping pardon of this nature. Now, the pardoning of family members, like your son, it's a little bit different. Donald Trump did Jared Kushner's father, who is now actually going to go on to be a French ambassador. So there is precedent of actually pardoning family members or family adjacent. But your direct son, that is an interesting precedent. So we'll honestly see how all of this pans out. But I don't want to talk about it anymore. Like I said, I feel like it was a flash in the pan moment. People had their little bit of outrage. They had a little bit of their hate. But at the end of the day, anybody who's been paying attention for a while knows when Joe Biden said that phrase, my word as a Biden. I promise you my word as a Biden. Or anything to the effect of, I promise you, that promise meant nothing. He's a political actor who plays the game the first time on the cameras and then works his magic behind scenes and then doesn't talk about it. So, with that said, let's jump on to our final article, which is a little bit more recent, actually. And this one comes from PolitiZoom. Headline reads, Musical Chairs, Hegseth out, DeSantis in line to head Department of Defense. Now, does DeSantis have as much experience as Hegseth? More or less. I would say DeSantis spent time in overseas, but then again, he was a military lawyer, so versus being in direct combat, it's a little bit back and forth there. So maybe he understands the politics of the military a little bit better, being in a role that you're not necessarily as boots on the ground, but you're dealing with internal politics of the military operations. Fair. Does he have the experience working directly in the Pentagon? Not necessarily as much. His time during the House, I don't believe he was on any of the foreign service committees. Then again, if I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody could very well point that out to me. And Hegseth had time working and advocating for veterans, so you could say all of those things are essential. Then again, there is actually a Veterans Affairs position in the cabinet that doesn't have to do with DOD, so maybe he would have been better suited for that. But apparently he is out based on reporting coming out from the Trump team, and Trump is looking for another guy, and DeSantis is kind of behind the scenes talking about it. I think it would be an interesting choice here, but let's actually jump into what this article has to say. Otherwise, what would be the point of me actually bringing it up and bringing it to your attention? Quote, DeSantis first began talking with Trump about joining his cabinet back in June. The idea was initially brokered by Steve Witkoff, a Miami-based developer and friend of both men, whom Trump has subsequently tapped to be his envoy to the Middle East. DeSantis, whose term as governor ends in January 2027, who could not run again because of term limits, was most interested in becoming U.S. Attorney General. But for the slot, Trump wanted an appointee who had exhibited the utmost loyalty, so he tapped Florida Rep. Matt Gaetz. When Gaetz proved unconfirmable by the Senate, Trump sought Bundy to lead the Justice Department instead. He goes on to list some of his history, him being a Navy vet, and also they believe that he would be an easier sell to the Senate than Hegseth would, which I think is fair enough. I think it'd also be a sell towards the more old-fashioned, I don't want to say rhino, because that term is overused and has lost its actual meaning, and it's used for everybody nowadays. So I would say he would be viewed as a little bit more of a traditional, maybe a Tea Party conservative, which could be something that's another kind of Marco Rubio, so to speak, to the Republicans up there on the Senate. He's a little bit more passable. He's not necessarily full MAGA, though he does try to embody some of the values of Trump, especially some of his rhetoric and the way he goes about being a little bit noxious to the interviewers that take him on or to the people that he disagrees with when he's out there on the campaign trail. But I think it will be a easier sell, and it will note that Trump is willing to play a little bit more ball if he does indeed bring him up. Now, the other interesting thing is that this article mentions is that Mr. DeSantis is actually going to have to approve or pick somebody for Mr. Rubio's seat. And I think that this part of the article was very fascinating. Quote, while you're rolling that around in your head, talk has also taken place about DeSantis appointing Laura Trump to the United States Senate to replace Marco Rubio's seat. End quote. Now, if that is not the Trump takeover, I mean, then again, the Trump takeover of the party already happened when Laura was basically co-chair of the RNC. So am I joking myself that there's a turning back from it now? But getting another Trump directly into politics, being able to have somebody that can be a surrogate for him while he's gone, and I'll be honest, I'll be straightforward. There are other surrogates that are loyal to him, that will spend time with him at Mar-a-Lago, that will consult him. We'll see what he wants to say, have to go for his approval, because it seems to be that sort of popularity contest in high school. Oh, yeah, we're going to go over to Jimmy's table and see what Jimmy wants to do tonight, blah, 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 blah. But the point being that Laura Trump being another direct surrogate in the Senate, it'll be an interesting dynamic for sure. I don't know if she'll have the same rallying power as Donald, but as time fades, unless people are willing to go directly to Trump and Mar-a-Lago, maybe there's more backlash after his next time in office. Maybe she's a direct surrogate for his wishes on the ground and she makes a new coalition. I think it's probably rare. I think people will not believe in her bona fides, her time being able to prove that she's an effective politician until she at least has one term in the Senate, because she's done okay with the RNC, but that is not the level of a policymaker. That's very different. So she'll have to test herself. But it's just fascinating with the way that this game's being played, and maybe Trump's sitting there like, okay, DeSantis, what I need you to do, my daughter-in-law, Laura, she did great. She did amazing at the RNC. What I need you to do is put her into Marco's spot. I pulled Marco up. He's a great guy, but we need to replace him. Okay, we're gonna stick Lara in, and then when that happens, I'm gonna find for a place for you in the little cabinet. I'm gonna find a place for you next to little Marco in the cabinet. All right. I hope he's not doing that obvious of quid pro quos, but I wouldn't be surprised if some style of that conversation was happening in order to get his way, because DeSantis does have the final say. So, at least when it comes to appointing the senators that will be temporarily in there. So, with that said, let's jump into our final article, because we've blown out the first two topics, I think, to the most that we can. And I think we've explored the most important parts of those articles, the most fascinating parts. And if you want to read any of those articles in full, they'll be in the link in the description below that like and subscribe button. But now we're going to go to our daily delight, which comes from Parade Pets. Famous hopping corgi dresses up in turkey costume for best synchronized stomps yet. And I can't disagree. This corgi is very entertaining when it's coming down those stairs. The costume, I could live without it, but also it doesn't take away from the animal's cuteness, no doubt about that. And this guy, he's coming parading down mighty fast. He is going, go, 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 hop, 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 hop. I mean, the energy on this guy is phenomenal. So if you want a little bit of a smile, you want to get ready for the holiday season, that turkey time, which comes between Thanksgiving itself and also when you have turkey for Christmas, I would go watch this one. It's a very enjoyable one. It will bring a smile to your face. And with that said, like I mentioned, for the other articles, but also for the Daily Delight, they'll all be linked in the description below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. A lot of them have been reposts recently because I haven't been able to read as much as we come into the closing part of the year. So I want to sit down again, get the reading schedule back fully intact, so then I can actually bring some of those interesting ideas that are normally shot around my brain when I'm reading, rather than just, social media hot takes kind of thing, which, there are important conversations, but normally most of the really good ones are evoked from the reading random things and bringing them to you guys. And also, if you want to come back here on Tuesday and Thursday, there's 6 and 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. The international news segment still going on, and you could also find that on the RSS feed as well. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.